This is when it starts all over for college football teams across the country with the season over, winter workouts, and getting started, getting in shape, and setting their sights on 2022. And for 11 Ohio State football players, it's the beginning of a career in Columbus in scarlet and gray. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports. Pat joins us on a regular basis. Got to check out his work again at Bucknuts 247 Sports. Hey, Pat, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing today, Mark?
I am doing just fine. So in regards to these early enrollees, 11 for Ohio State, that's a pretty significant number compared to other teams across the nation. You got a chance to talk to many of them last week. What stood out to you?
Well, not only do they have early enrollees, freshman early enrollees, but they have a couple of transfers in as well. So you got a nice little blend of some guys with experience and then some guys that are getting their first taste of college football. So it's interesting, I think, over at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center right now. But in terms of what stood out, the first guy that comes to mind is quarterback Devin Brown. Comes to Ohio State from Utah, committed kind of late in the class or late in the cycle, but Ohio State went and got him. He was a guy who it sort of looked like was going to be a replacement for Quinn Ewers. I believe he committed right before Quinn Ewers. I ended up leaving, and by replacement, I mean in that 2022 class, Quinn Ewers obviously reclassified. But he said, he would have committed regardless of Quinn Ewers being at Ohio State. He wanted to come in to compete with anyone. I was just really impressed with the way he handled himself. When you're talking to any of these guys, you like to see confidence. You like to see guys that are already comfortable. And a lot of them are sitting in front of the media. They do that in high school a lot now. But especially the quarterback position. Those are the guys that are going to have to be the leader. They're going to have to, assuming they end up being a starter at Ohio State, they're going to have to be in front of the cameras a lot. So seeing a guy who, has only been on campus about a month come in and already show that confidence. He seems like a guy who will be a leader on the field, talent-wise. 4-star prospect, highly regarded. I think he will be able to prove that no problem. But I was really impressed with some of the stuff he said. He knows what he's walking into, but he also knows that he's got ability. And Ryan Day obviously has shown a great ability to develop these quarterbacks. So excited about that. CJ Hicks, another highly regarded guy, the linebacker. He was a bit more quiet, I would say, when we talked to him. Still answered questions really well, but he was kind of the leader of this class. Committed early from Ohio, and really worked to help Ohio State land guys. He talked about that, and he said he doesn't consider himself that leader. He just felt because he was a guy who committed early, he had a responsibility to kind of help encourage other guys, talk to other guys, things like that. And I think it's interesting that role has kind of developed with the ease that these guys can all communicate. There seems to be one of those guys, if not multiple, in every class, and I'm sure this is true at other programs as well. But they come in, they either not always commit early, but get involved in the process and are really kind of the guy who is talking to any and everybody that Ohio State is seriously interested in. CJ Hicks, who's a guy who I imagine will be on the field, maybe not a starter his freshman year, but certainly early in his career. He's the highest rated guy in Ohio State's class, and a position of need at linebacker where there's really no true starters coming back. So those are the two that really stood out from the freshmen that I talked to. Now we're kind of, they bring multiple guys out at once, so we're kind of bopping around. So some of my coworkers talked to some of the guys that I didn't make it to, but both Diamante Traynham, who transferred from Arizona State to Ohio State. He played running back at Arizona State. He's going to play linebacker at Ohio State, played linebacker at Akron Hoban. So he's got experience there. And then Tanner Mcallister, who plays safety, but played under Jim Knowles, the new defensive coordinator at Ohio State, at Oklahoma State. Both of them were really interesting to talk to. Traynham, just his story, why he decided to come to Ohio State, why come back to Ohio. It was interesting. He says family moved out to Arizona shortly after after he enrolled. They are staying in Arizona because it's warmer and there's a lot more sunshine. But now they're going to have to travel back across the country to their home state to watch him play. But he was really excited about the prospects of moving to linebacker. He said coming out of high school, he had offers on both sides of the ball, but I believe the way he put it was that he wasn't ready to give the ball up yet. And now he's kind of seen the college game, and he probably would have been the starter at Arizona State, but he wants an opportunity in the future. He sees that on the defensive side of the ball. He's had a lot of people tell him that that's probably his position going forward in NFL and things like that. And he wants to win, and that was the biggest thing he stressed was he wants to contend for championships, Big Ten championships, national championships. Obviously, Arizona State, a fine football program, but hasn't been relevant at the top of the Pac-12 in quite some time. So he saw the opportunity to come back to Ohio State, a place he was familiar with because it was a finalist for him. He obviously is from the state of Ohio and has relationships here. So it was a good opportunity for him. Move to the defensive side of the ball and get to work there. Mcallister was interesting too because he knows Jim Knowles. He's been in the system. He's the only one in the program in terms of players that has been a part of what Jim Knowles wants to start working on with the Buckeyes this offseason. And obviously things will be different. You have different personnel and whatnot. But he certainly understands what's coming where maybe some of the other guys, are just starting to get to learn that. And so he also knows Jim Knowles personally. He talked about how when he entered the portal, Jim Knowles was one of the first guys to give him a call and said, he wanted him to be here. And he saw this as a perfect opportunity to kind of build on what Oklahoma State's defense did last year, third or fourth statistically in the country in defense, and almost got to the college football playoffs. So he sees Ohio State as an opportunity. He's got 1 year left of eligibility to come in, play a big part. He, as a safety, he's more of like a nickel back. They have different names for that depending on what they decide to call it here, but he'll be closer to the line of scrimmage a lot than your traditional free safety. But he's going to help teach guys how to operate in this defense, and he hopes it helps lead the Buckeyes back to the college football playoff and a national championship.
Yeah, I did not catch the Tranum transfer. So as soon as you mentioned his name, I thought that's one that got away a couple of years ago as a running back out to Arizona State from Ohio. So he's headed back to the Buckeye State. And as you just mentioned, some guys are looking forward to their future and get some input from people knowing that, okay, you project as a whatever at the next level. And he's making that call right now. And Mcallister should be a tremendous addition, no question about that, based on what he performed last year and already knowing the defense.
Right.
So transitioning from players to coaches, you mentioned Jim Knowles. Of course, the overhaul on the defensive side of the coaching staff. Who did you get a chance to talk to and what stood out there?
Well, with Jim Knowles, I think there were a couple things that really stood out to me. The first was that at Oklahoma State, it took 4 years. The 4 years he was there, each year they got better. And we've talked about this when I've been on before. He acknowledged that he does not have time to wait 4 years to get the Buckeye defense back to being one of the best defenses in the country. And I don't know if next year they need to be a top 10 defense to get to where they want to go. This offense is so elite that I think this defense just needs to be good enough. And whether that's top 30, top 20, I don't know what that needs to be, but it doesn't have to be a top 5 defense right away. Jim Knowles' defense is complicated. I think it'll take some time, but he's also working with guys that were 4 and 5 star recruits as opposed to at Oklahoma State. And nothing against the Cowboy program, but let's be real here. They are usually recruiting at a different level than Ohio State. So he's got a different caliber of player that he'll be working with now. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But he acknowledged that there's not the time to transition these guys into this defense. He's got to get it going right now. And he also, there's a quote that I jotted down here that I thought was interesting that he said about the defense. He said, "We want to be able to create indecision for the offense and particularly for the offensive coordinator. So we want to be able to create multiple defenses out of simple looks and to be creative in a way that players can understand." And I think that's just news to Ohio State fans' ears, especially, the people that really know football. This Ohio State defense, obviously you look at the numbers, it hasn't been good enough. But when you look at why it hasn't been good enough, I think Jim Knowles and what he wants to do is exactly what the Buckeyes have wanted to do, but just haven't been able to get there. And there's certainly the talent. I don't think that's a problem at all. I think it's just been the lack of a guy who's done it before, and not to take anything away from a Kerry Combs, who was a great cornerbacks coach, but he'd never run a defense before. And Ryan Day kind of pigeonholed him into a defense that maybe he didn't want to run. Now Ryan Day, and he said this, he wants Jim Knowles to be the head coach of the defense. He wants to bring in his defense, which is very similar to what Ryan Day wants to do. And he's going to run that thing. And so I think it was interesting and refreshing, assuming that gets done. That's exactly what the Buckeye fans have wanted for the last couple of years. And on his staff, two new guys, Perry Walton, who comes from the Jacksonville Jaguars, the guy who played for Ohio State in the early 90s, Tim Walton, and Perry Eliano, who comes from Cincinnati, where they just had two of the top cornerbacks in the country this year, are going to run the secondary together. Technically, Tim Walton's title is secondary coach / cornerbacks coach. Perry Eliano is safeties coach, but they're going to work in conjunction to build this secondary back up to where it needs to be. The last 2 years, it's been right around the 100th ranking, which is way down for what Ohio State's defense should be. I mean, I wrote something today, and I said basically, if they want to claim BIA, Best in America, which is what the acronym that they use, that's not the standard. So it's got to get back to that. And I think both guys showed well in their interviews. They said a lot of the right things. Perry Eliano talked about, just kind of opening his heart to his players. And, he said he talked with Kobe Bryant and Ahmad, I forget his
Gardner.
last name. There you go. Before, when he first got to Cincinnati in 2020, about, what do you guys want to do? What do you want to go? And how do we fit this in the team? And they both said they wanted to be All-Americans and NFL draft picks. And he said, if you guys open yourselves up, are willing to take in my coaching, we're going to get you there. And he delivered. So it's going to be the same type of conversations with the current Buckeyes. And obviously, he's starting, again, not to take anything away from the Cincinnati program, but he's starting at a bit of a higher level with the way that Ohio State's recruited and whatnot. So on that front, I think it sounded great. Tim Walton was very happy to be back at Ohio State. He said there's been opportunities or conversations, I guess I should say, about him coming back to Ohio State in the past. It just hasn't ever worked out timing-wise. Everything going on with the Jacksonville Jaguars, there was a real opportunity here. And we've talked on when I've been on before with you, Mark, about kind of the things that people have said about him, Jalen Ramsey being the quote that kind of got out there and circled around. So I think they've got two good coaches in the secondary there to fit in under Jim Knowles' defense. These guys are just kind of getting started working together. The day that we talked to the assistant coaches was their first day all together at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. They'd all been out recruiting, so it had been kind of back and forth. So they're really all starting to get to know each other here, but it really looks like and sounds like Ryan Day has obviously done his homework, but everything looks to be moving in the right direction for the Buckeyes.
To your point, Pat, if you believe in the total team talent rankings, you can go to 247 Sports. It's basically a composite of the entire roster, so not just one class ranking. Cincinnati at 54, Oklahoma State at 47, Ohio State 3. So there you go in regards to the athletes that they're going to work with on the defensive side. And yes, the offensive recruiting and players have been slightly higher ranked, but still you're probably talking top 7 or 8 in the country on the defensive side of the ball. And you got to think with JTT and with Jack Sawyer coming of age, hopefully in their second season. Zach Harrison needs one more audition for the NFL. That, man, the best friend of the secondary is a pass rush, and they could have a devastating one if some of those guys come near their potential.
Sure, and Larry Johnson is the lone holdover on this defensive staff. Everyone knows how good Larry Johnson is. I don't think there was any fear that he was going to be let go. I think the big fear was he going to retire? And that's a conversation that comes up really every offseason because he's been doing this forever. He's an older guy, but the Caden Curry, one of the defensive linemen that we talked to, the incoming freshman, said, Larry Johnson told him he would be here. He has no concerns about that for his future. So we'll see how long Larry Johnson remains in coaching, remains at Ohio State. But for this year, he's the guy that's back. He's going to be leading that defensive line room once again. And, more often than not, Larry Johnson finds a way to get the job done. And, you mentioned JTT and Jack Sawyer. I'll be very interested to see how both of them are used. Jim Knowles at Oklahoma State had, I think he called it a Leo position, which is like a hybrid defensive end linebacker that can kind of move around a little bit, make it hard for offenses to kind of read where exactly guys are coming from. Those are two guys that, with their athletic ability, could be in there. Zach Harrison as well. Though I think you probably want to develop that a little bit. You may go the linebacker route and try out some of those guys. Cade Stover, who moved back to defense for the Rose Bowl and played a pretty good game back at linebacker after being at tight end the last 2 years. That's another guy, just based on pure athleticism and whatnot, that could kind of fixture at that point. So we'll see how that position, but that's going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on throughout spring, who's working in that spot, because it's key to what Jim Knowles wants to do defensively. And Ohio State certainly has a number of athletic guys that fit that mold.
Pat Murphy's here to talk Ohio State football. Join him on Bucknuts on a regular basis there at 247 Sports. Steve Hellwagon and the rest of the crew talking Ohio State football and basketball on a regular basis. So join Pat there. Pat, we appreciate it as always.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mark.